that beautiful song just speaks so powerfully of this journey of spiritual awakening, this remembering of who and what we are. And that song was written by Kirtana, who's, I don't know if she's still active or not, but she has been, she had the privilege of accompanying Eckhart Tolle in one of his talks, and his introduction was that this song just really speaks the truth. And I think that the opportunity that you and I have in coming to a place like this is to make that shift, and particularly, you know, those of us who, of course, in any moment, we don't, regardless of how old we are, we might be stepping out of this body and, you know, shuffling off this mortal coil, and we have no idea when that's going to be. And the caveat to die before you die is an opportunity for us to, you know ourselves as we are, you know, beyond this form, beyond this body, so that when that transition time comes for us, we can gracefully let go, as opposed to clinging to what we have come to identify as ourself in this form called a body. And so, as I shared with you briefly once before, about a year ago, I came very close to being, you know, out of here physically. And it re-emphasized for me how I want to do this work, because not just for that moment, obviously, but it certainly will be a value in that moment, but it'll be value in every moment between now and then as well, so that we don't get so caught up in the material world, which is constantly shifting and changing. Yes? Do we know this? I mean, it's designed to change, and it will change, and even when you get it the way you want it, it's probably going to change, and it's going to slip out from under you. And if that's how how we are identified, and that's where we find our value and our sense of who we are, then we're constantly in a state of suffering, because if we can't control this outer world, then we're stuck, you know, rising and falling with the ups and downs and vagaries of life, and we're better than that. we can have a peace that abides deep within us, because that's what we're really made of. And so this journey that you and I are on is really, it's a journey of letting go of what's false, what's not true. And when we let go of the false, what emerges for us is the reality of our being. So if there's, you know, some say there's nothing to do in the spiritual journey because you already are that. And that's true in one sense, but if you are still, if we are still accumulating false identities, then there is something for us to do, and that is for us to begin to see through what comes and goes and what doesn't come and go, to know who and what we really are. So that was my unscripted introduction to my talk today, but it's gonna go that way more and more as I get to know you and you get to know me, and we trust the Spirit, you know, that's doing the scripting of this message. And I think that part of today's message will have a lot to do with just opening up, instead of trying to, you know, mastermind our life. Excuse me, mastermind our life is to allow the mastermind to live our life through us, and to be more in the surrendering, accepting, open, trusting place. And that's what I'm beginning to feel as I come here every Sunday. As I'm feeling more a sense of trust that, you know, we are here by divine appointment, and that the synchronicity that we have created by this gathering, as unique as it will be in each Sunday that different people will gather here, will evoke a message that will be particularly useful and helpful for the real-time moment in which we share this space together. So I'm excited about that, and allowing that to be more the norm than the exception. So thank you for sharing with me that intention for us to be spontaneous in our interaction, and to let Spirit have its way through us in a way that truly enlightens us and moves us closer to this realization that we are here for. But I am going to continue this week with this series that I started a couple of weeks ago, The Unitive Way and the Jesus Teachings. I didn't bring the book today, but the book is by Cynthia Bourgeault, called The Wisdom Jesus, Transforming Heart and Mind, a New Perspective on Christ and His Message. And if you read the introduction in this book, it says this. It says, if you put aside what you think you know about Jesus and approach the Gospels as though for the very first time, something remarkable happens. Jesus emerges as a teacher of the transformation of consciousness. Jesus is a teacher of the transformation of consciousness. And of course, if you look at the traditional understanding of Jesus through the lens of traditional Christianity, Jesus' teachings are emphasized, and the message that comes from the Christian doctrine is more about Jesus' life, and particularly the purpose of his life and his death. And there is not a whole lot emphasized about his teachings, which is interesting because when you think that when Jesus was delivering these teachings, there was no notion of a crucifixion, of a Jesus that has died on the cross. There was no resurrected Jesus in the scene. There was only Jesus, this master teacher, and what was coming through him. And so what was the experience of those who were listening at the time would not have had to do with this doctrine that came later after there was an interpretation of his life and his death. So this is sort of like really kind of going back to the original, that we are like bringing back the original innocence that we would have as we meet again this Jesus and his teachings and his words. And so today I'm going to talk about the Beatitudes, which Jesus had one great sermon. Every minister should have one great sermon. And that was his one great sermon. And so we're going to talk about that. But I think it's important to sort of re-emphasize what we've been saying every Sunday about what Jesus was, his intention. When he's talking about the transformation of consciousness, he's talking about the understanding that there is only one presence and one power, which of course is our statement of faith here. And in almost every Unity church will say that there's only one thing going on, one reality. And yet, when we look through the lens of our normal human perception, we see objects, and we see ourselves as in the role of a subject, and then everything outside of ourselves as an object, including other people and other things. And so we have a dualistic mindset, which sort of obscures the reality of our oneness. So it's so important that we have this shift, this transformation of consciousness, so that we don't miss the gold, the treasure that is in the midst of our being, by constantly looking at how we are separate and how we are different. It takes a concerted effort for us to return to this awareness of who and what we are. And that is the kind of shift that Jesus was inviting people of his time and us today to make that shift. When he said, the Father and I are one, and you are in me, and I am in you, it's just a clear statement that there is no separation. And he said, do not judge by appearances. And so he was talking about this human divine experience where, we know that there are appearances in life. We know that there's a tendency for us to want to believe that there are a multitude of objects and situations in life, but that isn't the whole story. The whole story is revealed to us when we go backwards. Instead of looking out at the world to get our sense of reality, we look inward into our own heart, where there is no separation, where we are one with the one. And that is the journey without distances, as A Course in Miracles says so eloquently. We feel exiled our soul feels in exile even though we've never really left this home. And the appearances to the contrary do not speak the truth. They are what would be called illusion or maya or disillusionment. Einstein called it an optical delusion of consciousness. Yeah? So, I also have put this in my notes here, that Einstein had a quote that said, "I want to know all God's thoughts. All the rest are just details." You know, and we tend to get it reversed. We want to know all the details, and we forget about, you know, looking at the big picture, the picture that is only possible because we have this thing called awareness or consciousness, and you could call that God if you choose God consciousness. And if that is where our focus is, then we are looking through this lens in which everything is colored by a deep sense, abiding sense of well-being and peace. And wouldn't that affect our relationships, and wouldn't that affect our work, and wouldn't that affect our purpose in this life if we knew that we knew that we knew that we are connected, that we are one with the one? And how would that, you know, affect those fears that we carry, those anxieties that we carry, all those things about how we're worrying about how life is going to turn out and whether there's going to be enough, whether she loves me or he loves me, or she leaves me or he stays. All of those concerns are not rooted in the truth of our being. Those concerns arise when we allow ourselves to be seduced by the appearances of life, which suggest that we are separate from each other and we are frail and we are vulnerable, and that we can be taken out in an instant by the circumstances that are against us. And all of that is true at the human level, and if that's the only perception basis that we have, then we are in constant fear, and we see people, maybe we are one of those people, where they are always in constant fear, on high alert and anxiety. And this country is, in the West particularly, we take so many medications for depression and anxiety and to keep us calm and keep us feeling that life is okay. And yet there is a universal remedy, and that's this journey that you and I are on, which is to contact the source of our well-being, not as an add-on, but as a recognition and a realization of our true nature. Yes? So this is the journey of awakening. So the Beatitudes, anyone know what Beatitude means? I'm sure you do. Think of the first Beatitude, or any of the Beatitudes. How do they start?
Blessing.
Yeah. So Beatitudes means blessing, blessing, blessing. And the Beatitudes really compromise Jesus. Compromise? No, they don't compromise. They comprise. Only had my glasses. Didn't bring them today. Anyway, they comprise Jesus' core teachings. I mean, and really, especially from this non-dual perspective, this oneness perspective. But they can be seen as moralistic teachings, and that would be more in the traditional Christian lens, where these are sort of like, telling you what you should be doing. But the way we see it through the lens of unitive consciousness, it's Jesus not telling us what we should be doing. He's telling us what we should be, what we should be being. It is again, it's the reversal. It's an invitation to look and see this truth that is buried deep in our hearts and bring ourselves into that realization. And as we bring ourselves into that realization, life is transformed. We are transformed. We see differently and we experience life differently. So, anyway, Jesus' teachings at depth is what we're about. And the first one we're going to talk about is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed is the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And when we talk about the kingdom of heaven, of course, we have to remember that where is the kingdom of heaven? Within us, right? So Jesus, if you're thinking about this as sort of a You know, through a traditional lens, it'd be, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, because someday they're going to go to heaven, you know. In other words, like, if then. It was sort of a conditional sort of an offering. But Jesus already said that ye are God's. You know, I am the light of the world, and you are the light of the world. So that was already established in Jesus' way of seeing all of us. So his invitation was for us to be poor in spirit. And what does that mean? Poor in spirit. From a wisdom perspective, poor in spirit means an attitude of receptivity. And contrast that with someone who is strong in spirit is almost like someone who is, you know, so strong-willed. You know, they're very spirited and they're strong. And he says, poor in spirit, which means not knowing is a wonderful thing. In other words, allowing yourself to be open, allow yourself to be receptive, allow yourself to be taught, to be teachable, to be accessible to the Spirit. Poor in spirit is an opportunity for us to step back away from everything that we think that we know and allow that which knows to emerge in us. Does that make sense? So poor in spirit is about being receptive and accessible to the Spirit. There's a Zen story that many of you have heard, and I'll just repeat it because I can, and I'm standing up here. I get to control what I say. But God told me to say this. So do you guys know that story about Charles Fillmore and the radio station? That's really quick, but it's this idea that, you know, God told me to do this. So someone came to him and said to Charles Fillmore, who had wanted to do radio and get his ministry out in radio. And so he went to the station owner of a radio station and said, God told me to tell you to sell this, give me this radio station to get his message out. And the station owner said, well, when God tells me that, I'll consider it. We've all felt that we knew that we knew, and that the world should operate according to our guidance. And of course, that may or may not happen. Anyway, the Zen story is similar to that, and it's a young student who has been studying for a while, and he goes to this reputed master, Zen master, and the Zen master invites him in and asks him if he would like a cup of tea, and he says, yes, that'd be lovely. And the student is just espousing all of his wisdom and everything that he's learned, and he's quoting the scriptures and just at the fount of knowledge, and his wisdom is just pouring out of him. And the Zen master begins pouring tea, and as the cup begins to fill up, he continues to pour, and the student keeps sharing, and the master keeps pouring, and suddenly the tea is overflowing, and it goes on the table, and then it's running down on the floor, and finally the student realizes what's going on, and he goes, stop, the cup is full. And the master looks at him and says, and so are you. So I think that's the best example of what Jesus was talking about. To be poor in spirit is to, let go of everything that you know intellectually, and it's because that is only going to confound your openness to this spiritual knowledge, which basically isn't something you need to learn. It's only something that we need to remember. It's a remembering. It's a recalling of our original divine nature that has been occluded by living our life as human beings and feeling that life is just this material world, and that it's me against this world, and I'm this vulnerable physical self, and then there's a whole bunch of other selves out there. That is, of course, the nature of the dream, you could say, but it isn't the nature of the truth. It isn't the truth. And so Jesus is inviting us, if we want to have this shift, we want to enter into the kingdom of heaven consciousness, then we have to let go of thinking that we know what we are and who we are, and allow the Spirit, the true Spirit of truth, to arise in us. And that's only made possible if we're empty, if we allow ourselves to be emptied of our thoughts and our notions about God and spirituality. Which is a sort of it seems like an oxymoron, because it does feel like we need to study for a long time before we're entitled to let go of studying. But that's only because of how we're wired. It isn't because you couldn't have a spontaneous and an instantaneous awakening and know the reality, and people have had those experiences. It's just that sometimes we have to hear things over and over and over again until we finally realize their truth and realize that those truths trump any lesser truths that we've been holding on to. Thomas Merton once wrote, he said, "At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which, untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God." It's the challenge of the spiritual life to realize that the enormity of the blessings of a connection with God has to do with the absence of everything that we think life is. So there is this notion, I think it was Meister Eckhart who said that reality or waking up is a process not of addition, but of what? Subtraction. Because what is real already is. We don't have to, God doesn't come into your life. God is already in your life. God is your life. You are God's expression. So there's no adding involved in that. That's a reality. That is the status quo of who and what we are. But these notions of God being out and then coming in, kind of comes from the way we see this binary way of seeing. And the Old Testament is full of stories where, if you were good, God would come and bless you, and if you were bad, then God would curse you and bring harm to you and your family. And, that whole notion of God coming in and going out, in that very anthropomorphic way. And yet, Jesus comes along and like some kid in the Sunday school said, I don't know what it was, but between the Old Testament and the New Testament, God got a lot nicer. It's true. Suddenly God, it goes from this God that is vengeful and angry and conditional, and I will smite you, and I will, this awful kind of stuff. And then Jesus comes along and talks about a God of love and grace and truth and peace. Wow, thank you, Jesus, for correcting our God consciousness. And of course, we still have work to do because we don't always hold that. But so this idea of being empty, and I was thinking, like, if a great artist, you went to a great artist and you said, I've started this painting, and I wondered if you would just finish it for me. Could you finish it for me? Because you're such an artist and such a master. I'm sure it'll be amazing. And the great artist would say, you know what? Why don't we start with a blank canvas? And I think that's what the divine artist is saying to you and I. Can you just let go? I know you've got all these great ideas, and you think and you think how this life is supposed to go, and how it could be better, and what people should be doing, and you think you even know, you think you even know how to pray, But really, the only thing that you need to do is nothing. And that's actually maybe harder than doing something, because it requires an extraordinary amount of surrender and trust to live with the deep-seated knowing that God's got you. The truth is your nature. That love, which is unconditional, is at the heart of you. And that there's a peace that passes human understanding, as Jesus said. And if we knew that already was there, then our grasping and our seeking and our desperate attempts to make life the way we want it could rest in a deeper knowing that we are already being taken care of. And that's what being poor in spirit is. It's about letting go of what we think we know so that truth can take its place. And that truth, it cannot, it's like the physics law that two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. We have to make space in our consciousness for this truth to arise. And what comes first is letting go. And then the second beatitude I want to talk about, and it's actually similar to the first one, is blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And the author talks about this. She says that from a wisdom perspective, mourning is about vulnerability and flow. When we mourn, and all of us have mourned some losses in our life. When we mourn, we are in a state of free fall. And that is, it's our heart reaching out for something that we've lost, but we can't find it because we've identified that this thing that we've lost is no longer with us. And that's what mourning is about, right? It's some great loss has happened. And Jesus is saying that when you mourn, this is a sort of a hard lesson in emptying, which is what we just said is a good thing. So when we mourn, if we realize that mourning is about us like going, oh, I don't know anymore. I just feel so bereft of peace and love. And that's like an invitation to the divine. Oh, you have space. You are seeking. You are willing. You are yearning to know something deeper and truer than that particular form which you thought was the source of your love, was the source of your well-being, the source of your support. And if you can let go of the notion that thing, then it can be replaced, it can be infilled by the truth of the love that is eternal and the peace that passes human understanding, and it's not dependent upon conditions or circumstances to bless you and to assure you. Does that make sense? So it starts out as sort of like that feeling when something's been ripped from your heart. But what happens there, if you are willing and you can hold it in the context of something that is for you instead of against you, which this is what we believe in unity, right? All things. Some things? No. All things work together for good, for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And God's purpose is to reveal the truth to you, that you might know the truth, and that the truth, as Jesus said, would what?
Set you free.
Set you free. Set you free. You must know the truth. So in this emptiness, if we can remain open, we discover this mysterious something that does reach back to comfort us. And she says, the tendrils of our grief trailing out into the unknown become intertwined in a greater love that holds all things together. Isn't that beautiful? I want to close with a quote from John O'Donohue. I had read parts of his poem at many memorial services, and I bring it here to you today because it speaks to this notion that even though when we're at the beginning of our grief process, we can have an assurance that eventually there will be an end to the suffering, and there will be an infilling of some higher realization and a higher truth. He says this: all you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wound of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from that gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. Let's take a moment to go within and allow this message to be deeply embedded in our hearts where we know this truth, this whole truth, and nothing but. I invite you to take a deep breath. And as you let it out, let your body relax in your chair. Feel the support of the chair. Keeping your body straight, but not stiff, as you align yourself with this vertical inspiration that is always seeking to reveal itself and be known in us. And with each breath, as you draw in, you are drawing in a space-making energy that is clearing out old stories, old beliefs, encrusted beliefs and attitudes of how life should be. And at the same time, there is a willingness to grieve. It's the human grief that makes the way for the divine intervention. As we let go of our expectations, as we let go of what we think should be going on in our life, as we let go of our regrets for what has not happened in the past, we make room for this spiritual understanding. We make room for the heart that is so filled with love that it casts out any fear, any doubt, any darkness. The light that you are is a light that cannot be diminished by the darkness, because the darkness has no reality. It's only the apparent absence of light. So open our hearts. We open our hearts to let in more light, to let the light that is already embedded in our being flood our sense of life. Even in this body, we can walk as light beings. Even in a world that is conditional and dualistic, we can hold on to this feeling that love is all-encompassing. And what is all-encompassing, as the Course says, can have no opposites. And so we thank you, Spirit, that you show us this way of making ourselves accessible to your presence and your power and your love. We trust and we surrender, and we give up stories that would keep us from knowing the whole truth of us. We let go of grievances that would block the light and the love that we are. As it says in the Course, hide no one from your love, or you'll be hiding a dark place where the Spirit is not welcome. So we welcome the Spirit. We welcome the light. And we allow it to grow in us and glow in us and show us who and what we really are. In this surrendered state, with trust, we sit quietly in the silence and know who we are as God's creation. And from this quiet place, remembering who we are and whose we are, we give thanks for the spirit of willingness that allows us to make room for grace and love and peace. Just that little willingness is all that is required. And the Spirit of truth rushes in to fill us with its grace. And so now we return to this time and place, having been transformed by the renewal of our consciousness, the awakening of our hearts, and our trust in the ever-present reality of God's being that is not apart from us, but is us in expression. We give thanks. In the name and through the nature of the Christ presence, alive and well in us, we say, thank you, God. And so it is.